Angelo Dundee kept the secret for 31 years. 31 years of interviews, documentaries, magazine profiles, and late-night talk show appearances where he talked about Muhammad Ali with the warmth and precision of a man who had spent the best part of his professional life in the corner of the greatest fighter who ever lived. He talked about the rumble in the jungle. He talked about the thriller in Manila. He talked about the rope-a-dope and the jab and the footwork and the combinations. He talked about all of it. But there was one thing he never talked about. One thing he had promised in a specific conversation on a specific evening in a specific city that he would never reveal while Ali was alive. And then Ali died on June 3, 2016. And Angelo Dundee sat in his house in Tampa and he thought about that promise for a long time. And then he decided it was time. What he revealed in the months that followed, in a series of conversations with a journalist who had covered Ali for 3 decades, was not what anyone expected. It was not a scandal. It was not a secret that diminished Ali or complicated his legacy in the way that secrets sometimes do when they finally surface. It was something else entirely. It was a secret that once you heard it, made you understand Muhammad Ali differently, more completely, more truly, as though all the years of watching him and reading about him and listening to him had given you a picture of a man, and this one piece of information, held back for 31 years by a man who loved him, suddenly made the picture whole. This is what Angelo Dundee told them. It started as so many things in Ali's story started, in a gym. Not the Fifth Street Gym in Miami, where Ali had trained for years, the famous one with the peeling paint and the smell of sweat and leather that journalists always described in their pieces about him. This was a different gym, in a different city, in the winter of 1971. Ali had just won back his right to fight professionally after the Supreme Court overturned his conviction. He was preparing for his first major fight of the comeback, and he was in a gym in Philadelphia doing what fighters do, hitting the bag, working the mitts, running combinations that Dundee could have written out from memory because he had watched them so many times they were as familiar to him as his own handwriting. And then Ali stopped. Dundee told the journalist that this was the thing he remembered most vividly, not what came after, but the moment Ali stopped. Because Ali never stopped in the middle of a session without a reason. He was the most focused trainer Dundee had ever worked with, which was saying something, given the trainers and fighters Dundee had worked with over 40 years in the sport. When Ali trained, he trained. So when he stopped, mid-combination, and just stood there with his gloves at his sides and his eyes on something that wasn't in the room, Dundee paid attention. He asked Ali if he was okay. Ali said he was fine. Then Ali said, "Angelo, I need to tell you something." And he told him. What Ali told Dundee that afternoon in the Philadelphia gym was that for the past several months, ever since his license had been restored and the comeback had begun to feel real, he had been secretly visiting a school. Not as a celebrity appearance, not as a scheduled public event with cameras and press releases and the whole machinery of fame that surrounded everything he did publicly. He had been going alone, early in the morning before the school day started, and meeting with the principal and a small group of teachers. And what he had been doing there, over and over, in sessions that lasted 2 and 3 hours at a time, was learning to read. Muhammad Ali, at 29 years old, at the peak of his public life, at the moment of his greatest vindication and his most celebrated comeback, could not read. Not in the way that the word is usually meant. He could make out words. He could navigate the basic printed world well enough to function, but the deep, fluent, effortless reading that most people take entirely for granted, the kind that lets you sit down with a newspaper or a letter or a legal document and simply absorb what it says, that had always escaped him, had always been a source of shame so profound and so private that not even the people closest to him, not the members of his inner circle who traveled with him and managed him and knew the details of his daily life, had any real understanding of what it cost him. Dundee told the journalist that when Ali finished telling him this, he, Dundee, did not know what to say for a long moment. He sat there on the edge of the ring apron and he looked at this man who had faced Sonny Liston and George Foreman and Joe Frazier and the United States government and stood in front of all of them without flinching. And he understood that this was the thing Ali was most afraid of. Not losing a fight, not going to prison, not even dying. The thing that kept Ali up at night, the vulnerability that lived underneath everything else, was the fear that someone would find out he struggled to read, that they would use it to diminish him, that all the words he had delivered so brilliantly in public, the poetry, the prophecies, the sparring with reporters, would be reframed by someone cruel as the performance of a man trying to cover a deficit. Dundee told him he was proud of him, that it took more courage to sit in that classroom than to climb into the ring with anyone alive. Ali looked at him for a moment and then said, "I know, but don't tell anyone. Not yet. I'm not ready for people to know yet." Dundee kept his word. What neither of them knew in that moment, what could not have been known, was how the story would develop from that point. Because Ali didn't stop. He kept going back to that school, and then to tutors, and then to a program that a university in Chicago had developed, specifically for adults who had struggled with reading throughout their lives. He worked at it with the same qualities he brought to everything he worked at: the focus, the repetition, the refusal to accept a ceiling on what was possible. The same man who had developed one of the most distinctive and devastating jabbing techniques in the history of heavyweight boxing, through years of daily repetition, applied that same methodology to learning to read fluently. It took him years, real years, not the compressed transformation that gets described in inspirational stories. Years of showing up, years of setbacks, years of sessions that went badly, and days when the words on the page refused to cooperate, and the frustration was real and visible to the small number of people who were part of it. But he got there. By the late 1970s, Ali was reading voraciously. Books about history, about religion, about philosophy, about the political and social structures that had shaped the world he lived in. His conversations, which had always been remarkable, took on new textures. The range of references expanded. People who knew him and spent time with him in that period noticed that something had changed, that the extraordinary mind that had always been visible in his public performances had found a new set of tools, a new depth of material to draw from. They did not know why. They assumed it was simply maturity, the natural deepening that happens to a thoughtful person as they move through their 40s. They did not know about the years of work that had produced it. Dundee told the journalist that one of the things that had stayed with him for 3 decades was a specific phone call. It was sometime in the early 1980s, and Ali called him late at night, which Ali did occasionally when something was on his mind. Dundee picked up the phone, and Ali said, "Angelo, I read a whole book today. Not part of one, the whole thing." Dundee asked which book. Ali told him. It was a biography of Frederick Douglass, the 19th century abolitionist who had been born into slavery, who had been deliberately kept from education, because those who enslaved him understood that literacy was power, and that a man who could read could not be fully controlled. Ali said, "Angelo, do you understand what that means? That they kept people from reading on purpose? Because they knew that once you could read, they couldn't stop you from knowing things." Dundee said he remembered sitting in his kitchen in the middle of the night listening to Ali talk about Frederick Douglass, and feeling something he could not entirely name, something between admiration and awe, because this was a man who had come to that book through his own private struggle, who understood it from the inside in a way that most readers could only approximate from the outside. The Parkinson's diagnosis came in 1984. It affected many things. It affected his speech first, and most visibly, and then gradually it affected his physical capacity in ways that were harder to watch. But it did not affect his mind. Dundee told the journalist that in the years after the diagnosis, Ali read more, not less, as though the disease had clarified something for him about how time worked and what it was worth spending time on. He read theology and history and literature. He read to his children. He wrote letters, long, thoughtful letters that the people who received them kept because they were remarkable documents, full of the particular intelligence of someone who had come to language slowly, and therefore did not take any of it for granted. Dundee told the journalist that he had asked Ali once, in the last years when conversation was still possible, whether he regretted not telling people earlier. Ali thought about it for a long time, in the way he thought about things in those years, with great deliberateness, with the patience of a man who had learned not to rush toward an answer. And then he said, "I think if people had known, they might have tried to help me in the wrong direction. They might have made it easier and faster, and I might not have learned it the same way. The hard way taught me something about what I was capable of that the easy way wouldn't have." Dundee was 89 years old when he finally broke his silence. He had been asked about Ali thousands of times across the decades, and he had told the stories that were his to tell, and had kept the one that was not. After he spoke to the journalist, he said he felt something he described as relief, though he clarified immediately that it was not relief for himself. It was relief on behalf of Ali, because the secret had always been, in his understanding, not a thing to be ashamed of, but a thing to be proud of. And secrets you are proud of, kept long enough, start to feel like a weight. He wanted the world to know, not the version of Ali that the world had constructed from the public record, the fighter, the activist, the poet, the legend, but this version too, the one that sat in a classroom in Philadelphia in the early morning before anyone else was awake, and worked, quietly and without witnesses, at the hardest thing he ever did. In the months after Dundee spoke, the journalist worked to verify what he had been told. He located one of the teachers from the original school in Philadelphia, an elderly woman in her 80s, who confirmed the visits with a specificity and an emotion that settled the question. She said that in all her years of teaching, she had never had a student who worked harder or was less willing to use his circumstances as an excuse. She said she had not known at first who he was. She knew the name Muhammad Ali. It was only after the third or fourth session that a colleague told her, and she went home that night and sat in her kitchen and thought about what it meant. That this man, at this moment in his life, was doing this thing, and keeping it completely private, and asking nothing from it except to learn what he had not been able to learn before. She said she had kept his secret too, for decades, through every documentary and retrospective and anniversary celebration, because he had asked her to, and because she understood, with the instinct of a teacher who has spent a lifetime in the presence of people trying to learn things, that some things a person earns by doing them in the dark are diminished by being brought into the light too soon. The light was fine now. It was time. Muhammad Ali had earned every word of this story, and it was finally, fully, his to give. If you never knew this about Muhammad Ali, if this part of his story was never told to you, share it with someone today. Because the greatest thing he ever did was not in a boxing ring. And leave a comment. What do you think takes more courage? Knocking out Sonny Liston in front of the whole world, or sitting in a classroom alone before sunrise and teaching yourself to read? I want to know what you think, because Muhammad Ali already knew the answer, and it shaped everything he became. There is a particular kind of courage that the world rarely celebrates because it happens in private. The world celebrates the courage that has witnesses, the courage of the ring, the courage of the press conference, the courage of the man who stands up in public and says the thing that costs him something. That kind of courage is real, and it deserves the recognition it gets. But the other kind, the courage of the empty room, the early morning, the thing you do when there is no audience and no applause and no one to see whether you succeed or fail. That kind of courage is in some ways harder, because when no one is watching, the only thing that keeps you going is the decision itself. The commitment made to yourself, renewed each morning, to keep showing up to the hard thing until the hard thing becomes possible. Muhammad Ali made that decision every morning for years. Nobody saw it. Nobody photographed it. Nobody wrote about it. No journalist tracked the story of the most famous man in the world, quietly learning to read in a classroom in Philadelphia before the city woke up. It happened in complete silence. And that silence, far from diminishing it, is the very thing that makes it worth understanding. Because what it tells you is that Ali was not only the man the world saw, he was also the man the world didn't see. And the man the world didn't see was doing the harder work. Angelo Dundee spent 31 years keeping that secret, not because he was ashamed of it, and not because he thought it reflected badly on Ali. He kept it because Ali had asked him to, and because he understood what Ali understood, that the story had to be completed before it could be told. That a secret shared too early becomes other people's story. A secret held until the right moment remains, entirely and completely your own. The morning Dundee finally spoke to the journalist, he sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold beside him, and he talked for 4 hours. He talked about the gym in Philadelphia, and the phone call about Frederick Douglass, and the decades of watching Ali read more and deeper and wider than almost anyone he knew. And at the end of 4 hours, when the journalist asked him why he was telling all of this now, Dundee said something simple. He said, because Ali spent his whole life making sure other people knew they were capable of more than they thought. The least I can do is make sure people know that was true of him too, that he practiced what he preached in private, where it counted, that the greatest of all time became the greatest of all time, not just in the ring, not just at the podium, but in a classroom at 6 in the morning when nobody was watching, and the words on the page didn't cooperate, and he showed up anyway. That is the secret Angelo Dundee kept for 31 years. That is the story he finally told. And now you know it too. What does it mean to keep a secret like that? Not a secret born from shame or fear of consequence, but a secret born from the understanding that some things need to be lived fully before they can be spoken. Angelo Dundee had watched Ali for more than 4 decades, watched him train and fight and speak and struggle and transform. He had seen the full arc of the man, not the compressed legend that posterity tends to make of complex human beings, but the actual daily reality of who Ali was when the cameras were off and the crowd had gone home, and there was just a man in a room trying to become more than he had been the day before. Dundee understood, with the intimacy of someone who had spent that much time in proximity to greatness, that the reading story was not a footnote to Ali's life. It was the key to it. It was the hidden foundation on which everything else rested. The intellectual hunger that grew into the political clarity, the curiosity that became the philosophy, the private discipline that fed the public brilliance. When people describe what made Muhammad Ali different from other great athletes, they tend to reach for the same words: confidence, charisma, speed, courage. Those words are all accurate and all insufficient. What made Ali different, at the deepest level, was that he understood himself as a work in progress at every stage of his life. He was never finished. He was never the completed thing. He was always in the process of becoming something more than what he currently was. That is a quality that is described easily, but lived with difficulty. Most people who achieve extraordinary things reach a point where the achievement itself becomes a kind of stopping place, where the identity built around success calcifies into something that feels too valuable to risk by continuing to try hard things in private, where failure is possible. Ali never reached that point. He kept trying the hard things. He kept showing up to the classroom. He kept making himself vulnerable to the possibility of failure in the spaces where no one could see it. That is the full and true version of who Muhammad Ali was, not the icon on the poster. The man who showed up alone every morning and did the work.